This is how I'm doing the curves on the hoodie jacket. The first thing I did was when I designed it so all the curves, I could start them with a flat edge instead of trying to do an angle to angle. They start at a 45-degree angle here. That way it's easier to fold over and start. So you just fold over, start. I designed the whole garment here with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I'm going to do a 1/2 inch seam here. Don't have to worry about back stitching because it's going to be top stitch. So you could start near the edge of the fabric. And it's really important to get the start correct because this kind of helps do the whole curve. Now I grab the tails because I'm right at the edge of the fabric. I'm going to give it just a little bit of a tug when I first start, just to make sure that the machine doesn't pull any of the fabric down in. Oh, make sure you got the right stitch on the machine. There we go, got it started. Now let me move the camera over here so I can show you a little bit better what I'm doing here. What I'm going to be doing is walking the top fabric on top of the bottom fabric, keeping the raw edges together and keeping it right at the 1/2 inch mark. Do a couple of stitches, bunch this fabric up here, take your other hand and move the fabrics around and line them up, and then you just walk it down like this. I guess this is kind of like doing a princess seam. It takes a lot of fabric manipulation. But the important part is to keep these two edges together as best you can and then keep them at the 1/2 inch mark. So you got to kind of go a little slow. Do a few stitches, realign them, and you make sure you don't stretch out the fabrics, the layers, because it's fleece, it does stretch just a little bit. Then you just keep following the curve around. And also when I designed it, I designed these curves at the stitch line and then added the seam allowances afterwards. That way it was a little easier to see on paper where they were going to line up. And I didn't make any of the curves super curvy. I don't really know how to describe how less of a curve or more of a curve. But I went with the more sweeping curves versus a rounded, more sharply roundy curve. So I call them whooshes. Kind of like the Nike swoosh, but a whoosh. So I might call this the whoosh jacket. Then when you finish, you should be exiting right here at the point. Mine's a little off, but that's okay. And I leave me a little bit of a tail because I'm going to be using it to pull the fabric through when I top stitch. Let me pull the camera back. Now that I have the curve sewn, what I do is get my scissors and I trim it down to a scant 1/4 inch. Which means not quite a 1/4 inch, but a little smaller, but not like a 3/16. It doesn't really matter. You can do a 1/4 inch, 1/8 inch, 3/8. You can even leave the 1/2 inch if you want. I just want the inside of the jacket to look a little bit better. So clipping it down to the scant 1/4 inch. When I top stitch it from the front with a honeycomb stitch, it'll just about encompass all of the seam allowances on the inside of the jacket, so it'll look a little bit better. And I got to snip those couple of stitches that were the wrong stitch. Now, this, you can't iron fleece very well, but what you need to do is finger press this open. I use the tailor's ham. Not necessarily because this is a curve. People get a little confused when they see this. It's just so I can have the pressure of my fingers right on the seam and not on the flat surface. I just press it open. Then I go to the front. I make sure the seam is still open, and I finger press the front, making sure that it's still pressed open underneath. You don't want to do too much finger pressing because you don't want to shine the fleece. Just want to set the seam a little bit before you top stitch it. See how starting this here at the 45 is the easiest way to start a curve. This is the edge is started at the 45 degrees. Now we're going to top stitch. This is why I left the tails, except I lost one of them. But I'm going to put it in the machine. Make sure the seam is open. Make sure you select the correct stitch. Mine is just the basic honeycomb. I'm going to lower my needle. I'm starting really close to the edge on this. Could start in a little bit because I do have a 1/2 inch seam allowance. But I might need to trim the edge, so I start as close to the edge. Put the needle in. Grab all of your tails. Then I lift up the presser foot and give a little tug to line them all up. Line the fabric up. Then for these decorative stitches, sometimes they are a little difficult to start. So what you want to do is grab your tails, give a little bit of pressure to start with. It's going to do like 3 to the right. Then it's going to move forward a little bit. That's when you just give a little bit of pressure in the back to make sure the fabric's going backwards. Then after I'm sure it's started well, I let go of the tails. And then I make sure, feel under here to make sure the seam is pressed open. And then I top stitch directly over the middle of the seam here. And doing the honeycomb kind of gives a reverse cover stitch look. I have a cover stitch, but most people have sewing machines. I do a project on the sewing machine with just the sewing machine first. Then I'll use the serger and cover stitch on another build. Sometimes you have to make sure it's pressed open underneath. Yeah. If you're an impatient person, this type of top stitching is probably not for you because it's a little on the slow side. I don't really like the look that much, but it's just super popular right now, so you kind of have to follow the fashion trends a little bit. Well, you don't have to, but I like to make custom pieces, but not so custom that nobody would ever want it. I know this is compelling TV here. And when you do the decorative stitching, not only is it slow to start with, you can't really go very quickly because you'll risk the machine jamming up. So you tend to have to slow a little slower with the decorative stitching. And that's how I do the curves. Then you can see it lays nice and flat. Then when you steam it, it lays much, much flatter. That's the exterior. Then this is the interior. You can see how it catches almost all of the seam allowances. If you go a little lower, smaller than a 1/4 inch, you can get it all under there.